Hello, you're on the Ruslan Belov channel. So have the negotiations ended before they even began? Of course not. Putin and Trump will meet. I think Putin and Trump will even reach some kind of agreement. But Zelensky has already said no. And Zelensky will say no another 100 times. I wrote on my Telegram channel that, in reality, as long as Zelensky is in power, there will be no peace, no ceasefire. Or rather, it can only happen when Zelensky realizes that Russian troops are just about to enter Kiev. Until then, I personally doubt there will be any peace. The fighting continues, and we continue to analyze the situation at the front. So friends, today I want to discuss the overall situation on the front with you. But mostly I want to talk about two directions, the two main directions where the Ukrainian armed forces are in the worst situation: Pokrovsk and Konstantynovka. In particular, the complete collapse of the Ukrainian front is happening near Pokrovsk. And now a new sector has opened there. Not the Pokrovsk sector, but the Dobropillya sector. Unexpected, right? I don't think anyone expected that at least a month ago. But here we are. Let's start with Konstantynovka. The fact is, Russian troops have broken through several defensive lines from different directions, from the south and southwest. From the south, this is the area of the villages of Yablonevka, Alexandro-Kalinovo, and Shcherbinovka. Right now, fighting is ongoing for Katerinovka and Klebanbek. Moreover, the Ukrainian armed forces currently have no retreat routes, and accordingly, no supply routes for their garrisons in these fortified areas. I'm talking about Klebanbek and Katerinovka. Why? Well, you see, there's only one supply road, and part of it is already under the physical control of Russian troops. Here, you can see the road junction, particularly the turn toward Klebanbek, is under Russian control. Of course, the Ukrainian armed forces can try to organize logistics under fire roughly along this field route. And they did try. You can even see here that it's marked. The Ukrainians tried to send reinforcements to the garrison trapped in front of the reservoir, but Russian drones ended up wiping out their military convoy. As a result, 3 M113 armored personnel carriers were destroyed. Plus, the infantry trying to evacuate and hide in the nearest tree lines was also wiped out. So that's it. The road is closed. What did they come up with then? They decided to supply their troops across the reservoir by boat. Yesterday, Russian drones also destroyed one of these boats heading toward Klebanbek. As I said in one of my reports less than a week ago, while there's still time, the Ukrainian armed forces should withdraw, or they will be blockaded. But true to form, they dragged it out until the last moment. And here's the result. In Katerinovka, the Ukrainians control only the northern outskirts. About 85% of the settlement is under Russian control. As for Klebanbek, Russian forces haven't taken it yet. The Russian army is trying to secure the most advantageous positions in front of the village. But the Ukrainians still haven't realized the disaster that's looming from the southeast. There, perhaps the most critical defensive line in this sector has been breached, which could result in the collapse of the front by 10 to 12 kilometers. A few words about the southwestern flank of Konstantynovka, and then we'll move on to Pokrovsk. The scale of the problems here for the Ukrainian armed forces is huge, because with the fall of the defensive line built through the villages of Popov Yar, Poltavka and Rusin Yar, we'll soon be talking about Russian troops approaching not just Konstantynovka, but Druzhkovka. Surprising, right? Why? Well, look at the map. It's empty here. Sure, there are some strong points, but these aren't villages, not large fortifications that can hold off the Russian army for long. And if Russian troops quickly reach Raiskoye, from these positions, their drone operators will be able to control the Kramatorsk-Konstantynovka road. That would be a death sentence for the entire city. So while the Ukrainian armed forces still haven't realized what's about to happen here, this must be exploited. Although, considering what's happening on the eastern and northeastern flanks of Pokrovsk, they may soon have no time for Konstantynovka at all. And what's going on there? Well, take a look. Let me clarify. As a military blogger, I only treat as confirmed the information for which there is objective control footage. When there's video showing, for example, a Russian soldier present in a certain location, then you can be 100% sure about it. This map, however, is updated not on that principle, but based on information the cartographer receives from locals and various Ukrainian sources. so we can't trust this map 100%. Still, some of the information, even without objective control footage, matches reality. I know it directly from people on the ground. So let's examine the front using this map, keeping in mind that not all marked advances are confirmed by footage. In Pokrovsk itself, I have no complaints. Almost all the marked areas have video confirmation. We have clear footage of Russian soldiers clearing houses here, here, and here. Moreover, Russian troops have advanced right into the center, and one Russian soldier was even captured there. This is also confirmed by footage. Even Ukrainian military experts write that there's no defense in the southern part of Pokrovsk. It's an open corridor which Russian troops are exploiting by constantly infiltrating, building up forces, and then pushing further. That's why the situation on the map looks as it does now. But all this is nothing compared to what's happening to the north. And what's happening there? Take a look. To understand the seriousness, look here. This is Dobropillya. The distance from Pokrovsk is more than 20 kilometers. So, as I said earlier, this isn't even the Pokrovsk sector. This is the Dobropillya sector. Yes, we can't yet say for certain that Russian forces have full control there, or that this isn't just reconnaissance and sabotage groups, DRG, but full assault units. There's no objective control footage. But there are indirect signs from the Ukrainian side. For example, here's a screenshot. It says Russian DRGs are already fighting in Zolotoy Kolodez. And where is that? It's here, already beyond Dobropillya to its northeast. The Ukrainians first wrote that Russian troops reached the village back on the 6th. So according to Ukrainian reports, fighting has been ongoing for 3 days in the Zolotoy Kolodez area. Moreover, yesterday there were reports that Russian DRGs were spotted in Dobropillya itself. Yes, DRGs aren't full assault units, but what does this tell us? It tells us that the Ukrainians have an open corridor, not only in Pokrovsk itself, but also on the flanks. And it tells us that since our DRGs are already reaching Dobropillya and conducting active combat in Zolotoy Kolodez, the Ukrainian front here has completely collapsed. And the map configuration the cartographers drew here is more than realistic. I'd give it a 70% probability. Otherwise, there wouldn't be DRGs in Dobropillya or fighting in Zolotoy Kolodez. It turns out Russian troops, instead of a frontal assault on Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, have gone around and, perhaps even unexpectedly for themselves, found an empty gap here. Now they're advancing further and further through this gap. Building on their success, if the Ukrainian command weren't idiots, they would urgently withdraw from Pokrovsk and Mirnograd and quickly set up a defensive line under Dobropillya. But they are idiots and prefer PR, so soon they'll face the reality that the issue is no longer just Pokrovsk, but also Dobropillya and Belozeskoye. That will be quite a shock for them. And that's why I don't believe in a freeze or in a halt to hostilities anytime soon. Obviously, the army is heading for its most significant success since spring 2022. No one is going to stop the army right now. Now let's look at what's happening on the political stage. Andriy Yermak, after losing the internal political battle with Nabu, has suffered a second defeat. And for Ukraine, this miscalculation could be fatal. The Bankova was so confident in the imminent imposition of sanctions against Russia that they were completely unprepared for the sharp change in the US-Russia relationship paradigm. Witkoff flew to Moscow to finalize an agreement between Putin and Trump on territorial division. Since there were no objections, Trump immediately ordered the summit to be organized. The Bankova is disappointed by the choice of venue for the Putin-Trump meeting. In Alaska, it will be only Trump and Putin. Without Zelensky, they will decide Ukraine's future. Zelensky no longer decides anything, and his European friends have been kicked out of the negotiation process. It's a total disaster, zrada, especially since, according to rumors, for a truce, Kyiv will have to completely withdraw from Donetsk region. A total defeat. US, Ukrainian and European representatives are meeting in London to coordinate their position before the Trump-Putin summit, Axios reports. Europeans are concerned that Trump may conclude a peace agreement with Moscow bypassing allies, the agency writes. Such a scenario would simply nullify Zelensky and the entire political course of the Kyiv office, which has tried to shape a long war strategy and push for sanctions. In effect, the Kremlin has now overturned the board and is building a new framework for an agreement with Trump. Meanwhile, Bankova, the Ukrainian presidential office, has lost its agency and will be forced to carry out someone else's arrangements. Ukraine will not give up its territories, Zelensky declared, provoking a wave of criticism in the West. But this is the answer to Trump's initiatives, a fully predictable one. This is exactly what I expected from him, writes Yuri Podolyaka, because for Zelensky personally, this is a death sentence, and Britain doesn't need it either. And for us, in principle, it's also advantageous. The next conditions will be worse for Kiev, and Trump will have an excellent excuse to blame everything directly on Zelensky. Zelensky's sharp refusal to exchange territories risks angering Trump, writes the New York Times. Zelensky's rejection of Trump's proposal could cause the wrath of the US president, for whom concluding a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia is one of his key foreign policy goals, even if the terms are unfavorable to Ukraine, the outlet writes. Previously, Trump had already accused Zelensky of stubbornness and unwillingness to make concessions. If Zelensky now tries to derail agreements between Putin and Trump, it will be a fatal scenario for Ukraine, writes Oleg Tsaryov. This would lead to Trump withdrawing his support and the collapse of the Western anti-Russian coalition. Amid problems on the front and growing domestic distrust toward the authorities, the Kiev regime would fall in that case. Total capitulation and full takeover of the country would follow. The German newspaper Bild, citing sources, claims that Witkoff allegedly misunderstood Putin, that he still wants all the territory of the four regions, not just Donetsk and Luhansk. Witkoff doesn't know what he's talking about, a Ukrainian official told Bild. Where all these people get their information about what Putin told Witkoff is not explained. The leaders of the Baltic states criticized any attempts to force Ukraine to cede territory. They fear that Russia might then target the Baltics. Former U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton said that the upcoming talks in Alaska are a victory for Putin. One could say Putin showed magnanimity by agreeing to come to the summit. The only place that would suit Putin even better is Moscow, he said. According to him, the situation is rapidly unfolding in Russia's favor. In fact, the US and Russia are discussing the conditions under which they will present demands to Zelensky. Capitulation, as is known, is also a way to conclude peace, Bolton summed up. Alaska is ready to host the historic meeting between Putin and Trump. For centuries, the region has served as a bridge between Russia and the United States, said Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy. He emphasized that he welcomes the upcoming meeting between the leaders of Russia and the US. Only 2 miles separate Russia from Alaska, and no other place plays such an important role in our national defense and energy security, the governor wrote on X. Dunleavy called the choice of Alaska as the meeting venue logical. The upcoming meeting between the Russian and American leaders in Alaska was also commented on by the Russian president's special envoy, Kirill Dmitriev. Born as Russian America, with Orthodox roots, forts, and the fur trade, Alaska reflects the ties between Russia and the United States, Dmitriev wrote on X. He also called for Russia-US partnership in the Arctic. According to him, the two countries can cooperate in environmental and energy matters. Talks about important topics in Alaska, the Northern Sea Route, space, trade alliances, and the promise of lifting sanctions. The exact agenda of the summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump is still unknown, but the points of mutual interest are obvious. The summit is taking place in a location symbolic in every sense. And no, this is not about Lend-Lease and the WTT-era meeting of Russian and American troops. This is about purely Russian-American cooperation. The Ukrainian issue is secondary, since Trump cannot pressure Putin or offer him something he wouldn't refuse. The US president has no leverage over European countries, which are the main advocates of sanctions against the Kremlin. Certain easing measures and the revival of mutual trade would undoubtedly benefit our economy, but they would only be a half measure. At the same time, there are a number of areas where cooperation would be very useful. For example, resolving logistical issues and banking operations. While maritime shipping is dominated by British insurers and European ship owners, they do not have a monopoly over global logistics. Lifting secondary sanctions on transactions with Russian businesses that do not trade in dual-use goods would benefit not only Moscow but also Washington, as it would slow the process of moving away from the dollar in BRICS countries' relations. Trump's interest in the Arctic and rare earth metals has not gone away. In this regard, Alaska is both a gateway and a potential new center of the rare earth industry. And it has suddenly emerged that, in leaving Baikonur, US space exploration has fallen into Elon Musk's trap. What seemed like a private space program has become critically important for the whole country and the main contractor for NASA. Given Musk's less than warm relationship with the current White House administration, it's entirely possible that Trump might propose joint projects to Putin, especially since Bakanov didn't fly to the US for nothing. Therefore, whether they manage to agree on Ukraine or not, the two presidents clearly have plenty to discuss. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Take care, think critically, and keep your curiosity as sharp as your morning coffee. See you next time.